Once again, very good morning, one and all. Grassroots Institute of Hawaii is with us on board. Jonathan Helton with us. Jonathan, I'm so glad you're with us, and I want to thank you for your patience. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Rick. Glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to chat with you. Would you mind reintroduction, a little bit about yourself with Grassroots, and then we'll jump into topicality.
Of course. So I'm usually in the background at Grassroots. I am a policy researcher, and so I handle issues from tax to zoning to the Jones Act, and usually my fingerprints are on a lot of our reports and our testimonies. So a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff.
And how do we connect with Grassroots Institute?
Yeah, so it's Grassroots, no S, institute.org. And we've got all sorts of information about the state budget and a lot of the bills that are being heard at the state legislature right now.
If you don't mind, Jonathan, if we could start with Maui. Recent announcements by the administration, $1 billion plus that are being earmarked or at very least proposed for Maui relief. And in correlation to budget issues pertaining to the Maui fires, can you also bring us up to speed on zoning issues pertaining to laws, et cetera, that have a net effect as well?
Yes, so we can start with the budget. So,
Okay.
I was watching the meeting the other day where the budget and finance director said, they're looking at possibly 10 to 15% budget cuts across the board for all state departments. The total cost this year is going to be $600 million at least, and that was what they budgeted for the next 4 years for wildfire response. So it's not good. And at the Grassroots Institute, we generally favor limited spending, but we recognize, this is really an emergency. I understand lawmakers need to put funds toward helping Lahaina fire victims. I think the bigger question, and we can get to this with zoning, is what are the funds going to do to make life better for the people who've been displaced? Because it might be happening, but it's certainly not clear to me that stuff is getting a lot better.
True that, and you're echoing sentiments I've expressed since the very beginning. Well, first of all, as a cautionary, and now it's further being reinforced because I cited information that individuals on Maui are still being evicted. Individuals cannot visit their own property. They're stymied at every turn, and there are people still living houseless, homeless, in hotels perhaps, but the bureaucratic red tape and the challenges just to have pop-up houses, which are now starting to appear, but 6 months later. In analyzing the financial aspects with the income that has been generated, revenues in the private sector, now in concert with the government, Jonathan, what are we looking at here, and how is the public assured that it's being used for the exact purpose that you cited?
Yeah, we're looking, the state right now is estimated to end this year with about a $1 billion budget surplus. But that was of an estimate from a bit ago. So we're waiting to see the next estimate from the Council on Revenues, because that's the big question. Can the state cover these expenses that have come up without having to raise taxes or impose drastic budget cuts on the state departments? And so right now, that's in flux. And in terms of whether or not we know this is getting spent well, there's not been a lot of transparency on that, unfortunately. And I'm in the same boat as you, that I wish I knew a little bit more of where money was getting put and what it was going to. But right now, I don't. So we're going to have to dive into the budget a little bit more once we get some of the updates out.
I think a telling tale very briefly was when Speaker Scott Saiki had noticed and then cited that former Representative Kaniale Ing had created a nonprofit which generated over $600,000+. He immediately called for a review because he had based on Ng's past, fiscal concerns. Is there any way that could be applied or should be applied to these huge expenditures of money? And honestly, I think contractors, developers, other ancillary agencies, companies, organizations will financially benefit more than the people who need it the most.
Yeah, at this point, that's what it sounds like. But some sort of review, once the dust settles on some of this spending, it would be absolutely essential. I mean, really, the sooner the better.
Yeah.
To say, what are we spending it on? How can we make this known at least to the people who are displaced, the people who are supposed to be benefiting from this? Because as long as they know kind of what's going on, I think that's the most important thing.
Yes.
But it would certainly help if everyone else in the public knew what their money was going toward as well.
Jonathan Helton joining us, Grassroots Institute of Hawaii. It is already, goodness gracious, 6:46 in the morning, 6:48 in the morning. Jonathan, can we turn here to Honolulu for a moment? We invoke the word zoning. Can you share with us any updates, insights to Honolulu zoning?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that, and we can bounce back to Maui zoning in a minute. But we are seeing some good progress on zoning reform in Honolulu. So there's a really big bill that's like 200 pages long called Bill 64, and it is rewriting Honolulu's zoning code. And is the entire bill good? Well, there's a lot of bill there, so we're looking at bits and pieces as they come up for a hearing. But there's some progress there. One part of the bill looks to allow more dwelling units in some commercial zones. So that could be helpful where you've got some of these commercial buildings that are sitting partially or totally vacant. They could be turned into dwelling units. The bill also looks to cut some red tape on accessory dwelling units and hopefully make them a little bit more affordable to build for people who are interested in that. So we're tracking that. It's going to be heard March 7th, I think is the next planned hearing. So we'll certainly keep you guys updated there.
Thank you for that. And to Maui again?
Yes. So this is one thing I am excited about. Next week, the Maui Planning Commission is going to be looking at some draft bills that the new planning director on Maui has asked them to look at. So one of the bills is going to be really important for getting long-term housing built in Maui. And in a nutshell, what the bill would do, it would allow more homes on each lot. So right now, you can build one home on a 6,000 square foot lot in Maui. And this bill would basically say, now you can put two homes there. Mm-hmm. So we're really excited about the potential of that long term. I don't know that that's going to generate a lot of temporary housing, within the next 6 months, but that is progress. And so there's a couple other good bills. They're being heard. I think it's next Tuesday at the Planning Commission.
Talking with Jonathan Helton, and we appreciate Jonathan taking the time today. You mentioned before the big square building, there is a potentiality of tax increases via bills introduced and moving through. Can you cite some for us?
Sure. So there's maybe three major tax hikes that look to have some momentum behind them. One would increase the tax on cigarettes. One would increase the conveyance tax on higher value properties. So that's when, if you've got a house that's maybe $3 million, you sell it, there's a tax on that transaction. So that's looking that it might be raised. And then the final one, there are several bills that would create some sort of additional tax or raise the tax rate on hotels and short-term rentals. So, we understand where some of this is coming from in terms of the state does want to make sure that it has the money to cover these expenses. But on the other hand, the state's economy is not in the best shape following the fires. And if all of these tax hikes are going to be implemented, you're probably going to see effects on the economy that are going to ripple throughout business sector, and that's a trade-off that lawmakers really have to consider before they decide to pass any of these.
In regard to hotels, short-term rentals, would that be pertaining to the proposed green fee, the $25 per person, I believe 17 years and above, or are there even additional proposals to increase, maybe via the TAT?
Yes, that $25 surcharge on, like, when you're checking into a hotel or a short-term rental, that's the main one, but we are also seeing bills that would increase the TAT. So I think it's specifically on short-term rentals. So it's very similar. It's a flat rate dollar amount versus a percent increase. But there, I think there are at least 3 bills that are in that sort of direction.
Right. Once again, Jonathan Helton with us. Could you help me understand cottage foods and how it pertains to where we are today?
Yes, so cottage foods, some people listening are probably wondering, what does that mean? It essentially means it's homemade food.
Okay.
So let me give you an example of what the state regulations currently are. If you are someone who is making jam in your own kitchen and you want to sell it, you have to sell that in person. You cannot sell your homemade jam through the mail to a family member on another island. And it's little regulations like these that can make life harder for people. And when we're talking about the budget, here's how this fits in. There's really 2 ways that the state can help grow the economy, and that's either through reducing taxation or through reducing regulations. Mm-hmm. And because the state is in such a budget crunch, the prospect for any tax cuts this year it is slim. We're hopeful, but we have to recognize it is slim. So the other way for the state to boost the economy then is to look at cutting regulation and allowing people simply to sell jam through the mail. Maybe that's not going to make the biggest effect on the economy, but it's the fact that lawmakers are considering bills like this. It's an indication of what needs to be done. So pass this bill. There's a couple of other bills that would reduce regulation. Those are the ones that need to get a lot of focus because of what looks like a budget shortfall.
Goodness gracious. It is 8:54 in the morning. That's why I appreciate these conversations, because it's a reaffirmation, or for many, just a heads up to the machinations in that big square building. I have a mantra that says politics touches our lives every day, whether we like it or not. And just in our conversation, that is profound. Closing thoughts, Jonathan, what else is top of mind with you that you'd like to share, or, again, the invitation to see you at Grassroots Institute?
Of course. So the one major thing I'd like to point out, I know you spoke with Chad Blair from Civil Beat earlier.
Yes.
There was a really good article in Civil Beat, and a similar one actually in the Washington Post that talked about the Ohana Hope Village on Maui. And that's, in a lot of ways, that's an example of how long it takes to build anything in Hawaii. They put up these modular homes within weeks of the fire happening. They wanted to get people housed, but people are still not housed 6 months later. And they've run into land use and infrastructure, and I think now water issues is the big holdup. And not all of that is the fault of the state or county government, but I do want to point out that project is built on agricultural land. And the only way it could be built there is because of the emergency proclamations. Otherwise, you would not be able to put as many units as they're putting on agricultural land. And so it's an example of it takes an emergency for anything to get built. And even in the emergency, things are not proceeding as fast as they should. So there's some state-level bills that I think would speed that up. And I'm happy to say the Maui County Council is looking to speed up permitting for Lahaina homeowners who might be able to rebuild whenever that is able to happen. So there's progress, but on the other hand, we're seeing the very human effects of how long it takes to build anything.
Amen. Amen to that. Jonathan Helton joining us, policy researcher for Grassroot Institute of Hawaii. I appreciate your time, Jonathan, and thank you so much for the contributions.
Of course, Rick. I always appreciate being on the show.